This is Chapter 1 of Gary Paulson's book, Woodsong. I understood almost nothing about the woods until it was nearly too late. And that is strange because my ignorance was based on knowledge. Most of my life, it seems, I had been in the forest or on the sea. Most of my time, sleeping and waking, has been spent outside in close contact with what we now call the environment, but what my uncles used to call simply the woods. We hunted, small and large game. We hunted and killed, and though I think now that it is wrong to hunt and kill, at the time I did not think this, and I spent virtually all my time hunting, and learned nothing. Perhaps the greatest paradox about understanding the woods is that so many who enjoy it, or seem to enjoy it, spend most of their time trying to kill parts of it. Yet, it was a hunter, a wild one, and an act of almost unbelievable violence that led me to try and understand all of it, and to try and learn from it without destroying it. I lived in innocence for a long time. I believed in the fairy tale version of the forest until I was close to 40 years old. Gulled by Disney and others, I believed Bambi always got out of the fire. Nothing ever really got hurt. Though I had hunted and killed, it was always somehow clean and removed from reality. I killed, yet thought that every story had a happy ending. Until a December morning. I was running a dog team around the side of the large lake just starting out on my trap line. It was early winter and the ice in the lake wasn't thick enough to support the sled and the team, or I would have gone across the middle. There was a rough trail around the edge of the lake, and I was running a fresh 8-dog team, so the small loop, which had 5 or so miles, presented no great difficulty. It was a grandly beautiful winter morning. The temperature was perhaps 10 below, with a bright sun that shone through the ice crystals in the air so that everything seemed to sparkle. The dogs were working evenly, the game line up through the middle of them thrumming with the rhythm it has when they are working in perfect tandem. We skirted the lake, which lay below and to the right. To the left, rising higher, were willows and brush, which made something like a wall next to the trail. The dogs were still running at a lope, though we had come over 7 miles and I was full of them. My life was full of them. We were, as it happens sometimes, dancing with winter. I could not help smiling, just smiling idiotically at the grandness of it. Part of the chant of an ancient Navajo prayer rolled through my mind. Beauty above me, beauty below me, beauty before me. That is how I felt then and frequently still feel when I'm running dogs. I was in and of beauty, and at that precise moment a doe, a white-tailed deer, exploded out of some willows on the left side of the team, heading down the bank toward the lake. The snow along the trail was about 2 feet deep and powdery, and it followed her in a white shower that covered everything. She literally flew over the lead dog, who was a big, white, wolfy-looking male named Dollar. He was so surprised that he ducked for part of an instant, then rose, almost like a rock skipping on the trail, and continued running. We were moving so fast, and the deer was moving so fast, that within a second or two we were several yards past where it had happened, and yet everything seemed suspended in slow motion. Above all, in the deer was the stink of fear. Even in that split part of a second it could be smelled. It could be seen. The doe's eyes were so wide that they seemed to come out of her head. Her mouth was jacked open and her tongue hung out the side. Her jaw and neck were covered with spit, and she stunk of fear. Dogs smell fear at once, but I have not always been able to, even when I was afraid. There is something coppery about it, a metallic smell mixed with the smell of urine and feces when somebody is afraid. No, not just afraid, but ripped with fear, and it was on that doe. The smell excited the dogs, and they began to run faster, although continuing down the trail. I turned to look back from the sled and saw why the doe was frightened. Wolves. They bounded over the trail after the doe, even as I watched. These were not the large timber wolves, but the smaller northern brush wolves, perhaps weighing 40 or 50 pounds each, about as large as most of my team. I think they call them northern coyotes. Except they act as wolves. They pack and have pack social structures like timber wolves, and they hunt in packs like timber wolves. And they were hunting the doe. There were 7 of them, and not one looked down to the trail to see me as they jumped across the sled tracks after the deer. They were so intent on her, the smell of her, that I might not as well not have existed, and they were gaining on her. I stood on the brakes to stop the sled and set the snow hook to hold the dogs and turned. The dogs immediately swung down off the trail toward the lake, trying to get the wolves and deer. The snow hook came loose, and we began to slide down the lake bank. I jerked the hook from the snow and hooked on a small poplar, and that held us. The doe, in horror now, and knowing what was coming, left the bank of the lake and bounded out into the bad ice. Her tail was fully erect, a white flash as she tried to reach out and get speed, but the ice was too thin for all the weight of her on that small, pointed hooves, and she went through and down in a huge spray of shattered ice and water. She was up instantly, clamoring and working to get back up on top of the ice next to the hole. Through sheer effort, in her panic, she made it, but it slowed her too much. In those few moments of going through the ice and getting out, she had lost her lead on the wolves, and they were on her. On her. In all my time in the woods and the wondrous dance of it, I have many times seen predators fail. As a matter of fact, they usually fail. I once saw a beaver come out of a hole on the ice near his lodge in the middle of winter and stand off 4 wolves. He sustained one small bite on his tail and inflicted terrible damage with his teeth on the wolves, killing one and wounding the other 3. I have seen rabbits outwit foxes and watched red squirrels tease martins and get away with it. But this time it was not meant to be. I had never seen wolves kill a large animal, and indeed have not seen it since. It was horrible, and I was not prepared for it. I thought I had great knowledge of how everything in the woods worked. I had hunted and trapped, and I had been in the army and seen and done some awful things. But I was still not mentally prepared for the killing. Largely because of Disney and posed natural wildlife films and television programs, I had preconceived ideas about wolves, about what wolves should be and do. They never really spoke to the killing, spoke to the blood. In films, they would go to the edge of it and then show the carcass being eaten. In books, they always seem to describe it clinically and technically. And it is neither clinical nor technical. There is horror in it. Wolves do not kill clean, if that can be such a thing. It is a slow, ripping, terrible death for the prey, and only those who have seen it will argue for this silly business about the prey actually selecting itself. 2 wolves held the doe by the nose, held her head down to the ice, and the other wolf took turns tearing at her rear end, pulling and jerking and tearing until they were inside of her, pulling out parts of her, and all this time she was on her feet, still alive. I did not have a gun, or I think I would have used it. I was having some trouble with the dogs, as the blood smell excited the wolf in them. They wanted to be at the kill. They were jerking and pulling the gang so hard that I thought it would break. I stumbled down in the deep snow along the lake and held them. One bit me on my hand, but I could not stop looking. It was all in silence. She was still on her feet, though she had the guts of her now pulled back to the ice, eating and pulling, and I wanted it to end. I wanted it to be over for her, and she sank. She somehow did not die then, and still does not die in my mind. She just sinks. Over and over I can see her sinking as they pull at her. When I could stand it no longer, when I was sick with it and hated all wolves for the horror of it, I yelled, "Leave her!" And I think I cursed as well, but it didn't matter. When I yelled, it was as the film had stopped. The wolves somehow had not known I was there. They had been so intent on killing, on the smell of it, that they had not seen me or the dogs, and the sound of my voice stopped them. But it did not frighten them. The doe was down now, spread and down and steaming out the rear, and all the wolves stopped dead and turned to look at me and the dogs. Just that. Look. And I knew that it was wrong for me to have yelled, that I was interrupting something that I did not understand, some ancient thing that I did not know any more than I knew what it was like to live in the Ice Age. They stopped and studied me. One of them, I think it was a male because he was larger than the others, raised on its hind legs to see me better over some low willows in front of me, and when he raised, standing like a man, the morning sun caught his head, and I could see that it was completely covered in blood, steaming with it. He had been inside her, and he was soaked with blood, and the snow all around the back of the doe was soaked with blood, a great red apron of blood. He stood for 2-3 seconds, staring at me and through me, knowing me, and I began to understand some of it then. I began to understand that they were not wrong or right. They just are. Wolves don't know they're wolves. That's a name that we've put on them. Somehow we have done. Something we have done. I do not know how wolves think of themselves, nor does anybody. But I did know and still know that it was wrong to think that they should be the way I wanted them to be. And with that thought and with a small understanding came the desire to learn, to know more, not just about wolves, but of all things in the woods, all the animals, all the dances. And it started with blood.